welcome to our podcast series on synthetic biology.
We're the City of London iGEM team of 2024, and our goal here is to release weekly podcasts you can listen to anywhere at any time.
Today we're bringing you our fourth episode on respiration and ATP. So let's get started. We just know you're going to love this one.
So, respiration. What do we know already?
It's breathing, right?
No, that's not correct, but don't worry because you're making a very common mistake.
Respiration is not breathing. Breathing is when you take a deep breath in and breathe out. It's essential for supplying oxygen to our cells and getting rid of carbon dioxide.
So why do we need oxygen in the first place, and where is this carbon dioxide coming from?
That's a great question. Oxygen is an important reactant in the process of respiration, and the products of respiration are carbon dioxide and water.
So for our younger listeners, imagine we were baking a cake. The reactants are all the start ingredients we need, like butter, sugar, and so on. But the products of the chemical reaction, in this case, would be that scrumptious cake.
You're making me so hungry with that. Respiration is a biochemical reaction which releases energy in the form of ATP through glucose and oxygen reacting, as we previously mentioned. And do not forget that carbon dioxide and water are also produced.
Respiration happens in all our cells, and it's integral to our survival. Without the ATP released by our cells in this process, we'd have no energy to do anything. No energy to contract our muscles to move, no energy for our heart to beat, and so on.
Where do we get this glucose?
Carbohydrates! You eat them! Thanks to your digestive system, they're broken down in digestion and used by your body cells.
I recognise this. We talked about it last time, didn't we?
Yeah, carbohydrates are molecules made of only carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen.
So when I'm eating toast in the morning, I'm really just consuming a bunch of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen atoms carefully arranged in a very particular structure.
That's actually an interesting thought for breakfast. We've also said that respiration is a reaction with glucose and oxygen, but this is not always the case. When oxygen is involved, respiration is said to be aerobic. Here, these expected products of CO2 and water are formed.
So wait, what's the overall equation for that?
So the overall equation is, for every one glucose molecule reacting with 6 oxygens, they turn into 6 water molecules and 6 carbon dioxide molecules.
But what if there's no oxygen?
It's a bit more complicated then. You certainly don't release as much ATP as you would if you were aerobically respiring, but at least you release some energy. For example, if someone has a heart attack caused by a blockage of the coronary artery, the heart muscle cells don't have access to red blood cells which carry oxygen, so they have to respire anaerobically without oxygen to survive. It's like going into low power mode.
And when cells respire anaerobically, they make a substance called lactic acid. Now this is gnarly stuff, and it's what makes anaerobic respiration unsustainable in the long run.
And I've heard people say that the lactic acid that builds up in your muscles causes the soreness after workout. Is this true?
Yeah, I don't really think that's true. After you stop intensely exercising and your muscle cells go back to contracting at a normal rate, this lactic acid is broken down. And for this to happen, you need a bit more oxygen than you would normally, both to supply the respiration happening in your cells and to break down the lactic acid.
Where did you say this lactic acid was broken down?
This lactic acid is broken down in the liver, and it's oxidized to form carbon dioxide and water or converted into glucose.
But the smart thing is, this glucose is then promptly converted into a storage molecule called glycogen. This is because during the intense respiration of the muscle cells under aerobic conditions, i.e. with oxygen, the cells also outstrip their supply of glucose, so glycogen is broken down to supply more molecules of glucose. So this storage has to then be remade and restored.
This whole process is called oxygen debt, and it's the reason that lactic acid doesn't cause long-term muscle soreness. It's instantly repurposed and broken down.
Wait, but why are we talking about muscle cells again?
Well, in this instance, we're looking at anaerobic respiration during exercise, so it's your skeletal muscles that are demanding the most energy.
Okay, that makes sense, but why do we require oxygen all the time, and why don't our cells just anaerobically respire and then break down the lactic acid that's produced?
Well, if our cells were always anaerobically respiring, there'd be a point where our body couldn't break down the lactic acid at the same rate as it being produced.
And when lactic acid builds up in muscle cells, it reduces the pH within it. which decreases enzyme activity and other biochemical reactions. It is an acid after all. If you're interested in more, we're going to be talking about this in the next episode, so stay tuned for that.
And all this was for animals, so let's talk a bit about yeast, which is an example of a fungi. In yeast, anaerobic respiration is called fermentation and produces ethanol and carbon dioxide, so it doesn't produce lactic acid like it would in our cells. And the funny thing is, this is actually how beer is made, because ethanol is in beer, obviously.
Ooh, okay, that makes a lot of sense. I was actually wondering whether this was the same across all species.
Thing then before we go. What is ATP? It stands for Awesome Tiny Powerhouse, right?
It is awesome, it is tiny, and it is basically a powerhouse. It actually stands for adenosine triphosphate.
ATP provides energy through a process called hydrolysis. When ATP loses a phosphate group, it becomes ADP, which stands for adenosine diphosphate, releasing energy in the process.
And this energy is used to power various cellular activities such as muscle contraction, nerve impulse transmission, and protein synthesis.
In essence, ATP acts like a rechargeable battery, constantly being converted back and forth between ATP and ADP to fuel the body's functions.
Wow, okay, I think this might be my favourite molecule of all time.
Yes, I agree. This molecule was made through aerobic or anaerobic respiration, one of the most important chemical reactions in living organisms.
Well, time's up for today. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to let us know, and we'd also love to hear your thoughts on what caught your attention in this episode.
Check out our Instagram and TikTok pages.
Thanks for tuning in, and remember to join us again next week.